The last thing I expected that evening was for my life to change forever with a single sentence. I stood in the kitchen, washing the dishes like any other night, when the phone rang. It was her voice on the other end, but it wasn't her. Not really. Audrey and I had been married for 5 years. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better, real, imperfect, and, at least most of the time, deeply loving. We had our disagreements, of course. Money, work, family life's usual chaos, but we were partners. Or, at least, I thought we were. When she was admitted to the hospital 2 weeks ago, I wasn't prepared for the impact it would have on us. At first, it seemed like just a small thing, a routine procedure that required some recovery. But as the days stretched on, my worry deepened. She wasn't improving as quickly as I thought she should. We spoke daily, and though her voice always sounded tired, she assured me everything was fine. But that night, when I picked up the phone, I wasn't speaking to my wife. The phone call came just as I was finishing cleaning the kitchen. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Audrey's name, but there was something off about it. The number flashed on the screen twice, an odd pattern, and a creeping sense of unease slipped down my spine. I answered, expecting to hear her familiar, weary voice. But the tone that came through the line was all wrong. "Hello?" I said, my voice cautious, as if I already knew something was wrong. "Hi, it's Audrey," came the voice on the other end. But it didn't sound like her. It was colder, flatter, more mechanical. I froze. "Audrey?" I repeated, my heart starting to pound. "Is everything okay? You sound strange." There was a long pause on the line before she answered, a slight tremor in her voice. "I'm fine. I just wanted to call you. I don't know how to explain this, but..." I held my breath, my skin prickling with anxiety. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. "What is it? What's wrong?" She didn't answer. The silence was suffocating, and then I heard something faint and distant, like a murmur of voices in the background. It made my skin crawl. "Audrey?" I asked again, this time a bit more desperately. "I have to go," she said, abruptly ending the call before I could say another word. I stood there, phone still in hand, my heart hammering in my chest. It was her number, her voice. But something was wrong, something deep down in the pit of my stomach told me that this wasn't the woman I'd married. For the next few days, I couldn't shake that strange feeling. Audrey seemed off when I spoke to her next, but I chalked it up to the lingering effects of her recovery. Maybe it was the medication, or the stress of being in the hospital for so long. But the more I thought about that call, the more I began to notice things I hadn't before, things I hadn't wanted to see. Her texts were short, almost robotic. She'd been so warm and engaging when we first started dating. But now, each message felt like a chore. She would send a love you here and there, but there was no depth, no spark. It was as if she was just going through the motions. And then there was her behavior. She wouldn't make eye contact when we spoke on the phone. When she called me, her voice didn't have the familiar rise and fall I'd once loved. It was stiff, mechanical. I started to wonder if I was just paranoid or if I had missed something important while she was in the hospital. The unease gnawed at me. It was during one of our late-night conversations that I noticed the first glaring inconsistency. Audrey had mentioned a strange doctor she'd been seeing. Someone I'd never heard of before. She said they were just keeping an eye on things. But when I tried to ask more, she deflected, changing the subject quickly, almost too quickly. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I checked her phone. The password had always been a running joke between us, she never had one, and I always respected her privacy. But that night, I felt desperate. I needed answers. What I found didn't make sense. It wasn't a lot, just a few odd text messages. But they struck me like a slap in the face. There were exchanges with someone named G, someone I'd never heard of. And the content of the messages was unsettling. They spoke in vague terms, but I could tell enough to make my blood run cold. Words like soon and not much longer. There was one text that made my stomach drop. Don't worry, the plan is working perfectly. She's already starting to forget. Forget? Forget what? I felt sick. My mind raced, jumping from one dark thought to the next. Had she been hiding something from me all along? Was she seeing someone else? Was this all part of some elaborate scheme? I didn't know, but I knew I had to find out. I took action. I contacted her hospital. At first, they told me they couldn't share any details due to privacy laws, but after some well-placed questions and a few strained minutes on hold, I learned something that made my skin crawl. Audrey hadn't been under the care of the doctor she had mentioned at all. In fact, the name she'd given me didn't match any of the attending physicians on her case. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was in a maze, and every turn just led me deeper into confusion. Had I been living a lie? And if so, for how long? That night, I couldn't sleep. I was too frantic, my thoughts spiraling. I needed to confront Audrey. I had to know the truth. I arrived at her apartment after midnight, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The lights were on, but when I knocked on the door, no one answered. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic started to rise in my chest. Where was she? What was happening? It wasn't until I went to the back door, something I'd never done before, that I found it cracked open. The door wasn't locked, as it usually was. My heart thundered in my chest as I stepped inside. Audrey? I called out, my voice barely a whisper, but the house felt different. Empty. Cold. I wandered through the rooms, my breath shallow, until I found her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, staring at her phone, her back to me. I could feel her tense as I approached. When she turned to face me, her eyes were hollow, empty in a way that sent a chill through me. What's going on, Audrey? I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. Who is G? Why are you lying to me? She blinked, her expression shifting, as if struggling to comprehend the question. And then, in the most unnatural tone, she said something that nearly shattered me. I'm not Audrey. I stood there, rooted to the spot, heart pounding. The woman in front of me wasn't my wife. Her face, her body, everything about her was the same. But the eyes, the way she moved. It wasn't her. The realization hit me like a freight train, and I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. I had to get out of there. My breath came in shallow gasps as I darted back to my car, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know what to think, who to trust. But one thing was clear: my wife was gone. The woman I had loved, the woman I had married, wasn't the person I thought she was. I needed answers. I set out to find them, calling in favors, digging into every detail of her past. It took weeks of relentless searching, of pushing people, of combing through documents, until I found what I needed. Audrey had been replaced. The real Audrey, the woman I had known, had disappeared months ago after an accident. She'd been swapped with an imposter. A stranger who had been living in her skin, pretending to be her, lying to everyone, including me. And the worst part? I didn't know if the real Audrey would ever come back. It's been 2 months now. The woman I once called my wife is gone, and the imposter is still here, but it doesn't matter anymore. I've learned to trust myself again, to trust the gut feeling I had that night. Maybe it's time for me to move on. Maybe it's time to let go. But there's one thing I know for sure: life has a way of throwing us into the unknown, and sometimes we find ourselves standing on the edge of everything we thought we knew. The key is to not look down. Sometimes, the people closest to us are the best at hiding secrets, but life always finds a way to expose the truth if we're willing to pay attention.